White is completely, for me, a political concept. That is, it's a relationship to power and nothing else. I don't resonate very much with concepts like white identity or I don't think there is such a thing. There is power in the world distributed in various ways around different axes, one of which is racial. We happen to live in the United States in a white supremacist culture. Historically, white supremacists, also to the contemporary moment, white supremacists. A system in which power is distributed in part based on race, with white dominance. Okay, so that's a political system. I don't like it. So, white is a way power is distributed, and my relationship to it is to want to resist it. The white American male, I mean, it's a disease as far as I can tell. Well, for one thing, the white American male is sort of defined as the norm, the benchmark against which others are judged. So, to be successful in the United States is essentially to be judged on a set of criteria that come out of this white American male identity. That's a lot about connecting achievement and success to domination, a certain conception of what it means to be powerful in the world, to be in control and be in charge. But it's kind of pathology. I mean, it's very destructive, both to oneself and to others. And so in that sort of hegemonic kind of white American male identity, you see really the worst of the culture. I mean, the culture that's rooted in a sense of control and domination.
The gap between the rich and the poor in this country is getting, greater and greater all the time. And you can't separate race from that, because again, I want to point out again that most of the people in the prisons right now are black and brown. And that's not because biologically, black and brown people are wired to commit more crimes, you know what I mean? It's because they're poor. Why are they poor? You know what I mean? You can just keep going back and back and back, and it ends up, you always come back to the history of like, well, it's because this country has been defined as a place for white people to succeed, and it's really, really hard for white people to get that, because then what happens when I teach this is, I have students like yourself who go on to really interrogate it, and it's very, very difficult, I think, if you're white, to like go beyond and sort of think, okay, well, what do we do then, right? But the initial reaction every time I teach that race class is, I always have at least 2 students just completely break down and cry in office hours because they can't handle it, right? Because of the guilt. And the guilt comes from thinking, it's all my fault. It's all my ancestors' fault. When, you know what? That's not what it's about. It's not about individual blame, right? It's about, we're all in this together. How are we defining the United States?
For example, I was in Wichita Falls, Texas with my dad, went to the mall and wanted something to eat, and I was virtually ignored. Me and my dad were ignored. I mean, people came up behind us and they waited on them before they waited on us. Whenever I approach a situation like that, I've got a checklist in my mind. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe I go through this huge checklist because I don't want to call something racist it's not. Majority of the time, 99% of the time, there's always that what if. What if they're just having a bad day? What if they didn't see me? Usually I can check it and then say, okay, it seemed racist, but it can also be this and this and this. Well, that one particular situation was my checklist was free. I went through the entire checklist and said, no, she saw me. She's not, if they're having a bad day, this does not excuse what happened. It was a racist situation there where white was privileged in that particular situation. It's still there. But I also think, like I mentioned earlier, you're not going to be perceived if you are of that dominant culture, or unless you've been trained to, or whatever, If it's in your face that you're being treated as a second-class citizen, and you are treated as a second-class citizen, the white privilege is going to be more apparent. If you are of the default, like we mentioned before, then that's the center, right?
In fact, to me, it's the same way it's affected everybody who's white. There are a certain set of privileges you have by virtue of being born white in a white supremacist culture. At that point, once you recognize that, you have a choice about how to deal with it. Does one resist it, knowing that you can't give away? Privilege isn't something you give away. It's accorded to you by a culture. Therefore, you can't simply stand up and say, I don't want to have white privilege anymore. Because it's not something you choose, it's something that's given to you in that sense. But you can resist it, you can try and be part of a political movement to undermine it. So in a sense, to answer the question, what's the right way to be white? Well, the first thing is to recognize the nature of the society you live in. And then from my point of view, make a choice to try and resist the unjust aspects of that society, one of which is around race.
People that are very privileged, there can be a kind of softness about the thinking, and definitely kind of arrogance, and a kind of lack of responsiveness.
A lot of this is psychological. I mean, the costs of white supremacy for white people are mostly psychological. It deforms you. In the same way that, very analogous to the same way that the price of being a man in patriarchy, it kind of deforms, unless you intervene to try and change it, it kind of deforms your personality. You become less than fully human. The other thing about, the other great cost of whiteness is it makes you really stupid. I mean, white people are just really stupid about race. Like, men are really stupid about gender. Like, people in the U.S. are really stupid about the nature of the world. Anytime you're in a position of inordinate privilege and power that's not earned, there's kind of an incentive to remain stupid so you don't actually understand the system you're in. So maybe the biggest cost of being white is the tendency towards stupidity. I don't know.
Taught that the American dream is so much underneath all of it. It's about, if you have more things, if you have your house in the suburbs and your car, and and you can keep up with the Joneses, then you've made it, right? And that's been primarily coded a white dream. But then you look at the result of that, and it's like these spiritually and emotionally deprived children. Yeah? It's kind of scary if you think about it.
Sure. Well, it's affecting everybody, right? And this is a point that's often missed in discussions of race, is that race affects everybody. And inequality affects everybody, that injustice in our society affects everybody.
And again, back to Hegel and master-slave relationship, it ironically, while white people are terribly privileged materially, it has robbed them of their humanity because they're so blinded to the world around them, and it's made them kind of zombies, walking. Technically alive, but not really aware of the world.
But there's a big myth going on right now saying that racism is over. There is no racism anymore, and I don't know. I'm not sure how that started, and I'm not sure what's propagating that myth. But I'd like to find out.
I think to some extent you have to be a person of color walking around to really get a sense of how racism continues to exist. And this is not to say white people cannot experience racism, but you can experience it directly. You can experience it if you have a good friend who is non-white and you see how they're treated. It could open your eyes, to something, but you're not going to see it because that is not going to be aimed at you. So it's interesting. You have the same space and people are navigating it differently and people are being treated differently.